So, good evening, everybody. I hope wherever you are, the weather is as nice as it is here in New York. This is David True. Many of you may know me. Those of you who don't, I'm the president of NYPAY, and I'm real excited. I can't say how much for this discussion, and thankful for both Patty Hewitt and for the participants to have this, which is going to be a great conversation about a topic that touches payments in so many different ways, but very rarely gets talked about in a free discussion. And that's what we're meant to have today, is a very free discussion. It's not a press discussion. We're not having reporters here. It's meant to be a discussion amongst individuals who are experienced, not representing their companies per se, but representing the experiences they've had in the payment space, to talk about this topic. First off, I'd like to thank our annual sponsor, Davis Wright and Tremaine, DWT. Without them, none of this would be possible. NYPAY is a 501c6 nonprofit. Nobody makes a salary. We have Bill and Nikki and their team and we hire them to make the magic happen. But without sponsors, this wouldn't happen. So I want to thank them. If you've not attended NYPAY events before, I hope you find this as interesting as we try to make them. The whole objective of a NYPAY event is that one would attend and then leave it knowing something more than this is not pitches. This is not people selling stuff. This is conversations where you walk away a little bit smarter with a different viewpoint than you had when entering the event. So I'm hopeful and confident that this event will continue that tradition that we've established over having done 60 plus events over the last 10 years. Some mechanical or housekeeping questions. So those of you who are attending, please mute yourselves and shut off the cameras. I'll probably do the same. It's just distracting we'd like the focus to be on those who are on the panel and leading the discussion. Any questions, and I'm hoping there will be a significant number of questions, just post them to the chat and we will get to those questions. This is a topic which I think a lot of people want to talk about. They often don't for various reasons, but that's why I'm so thankful that we're having this discussion today. So please feel free to use chat to post your questions. And also share your contact information or LinkedIn information in chat, because I think you can connect with individuals as well as the group. One thing that NYPAY tries to do is networking. And to that point, one thing that we miss that we have had in the past when we had in-person events where you hang out with a glass of wine and some cheese that you probably don't eat and just lay down on the table at some point, was a chance to network. And that's hard to replicate, but we're thinking about doing something next month that would be almost just an hour-long session, sort of speed networking using the Zoom platform. So that's a segue into some of the things that we're thinking about or that are coming up in the future of NYPAY. Immediately coming up will be the second part to the Naked Interchange discussion, and that will be on the 20th, 1 week from this evening. And then on May 26th, there will be an event on prop tech or property technology. Just using, one of the beautiful things about payments is that anytime a transaction takes place, a payment has to be there to complete the transaction. So it really touches so many areas. Anytime there's commerce, there's a payment taking place. And there's a tremendous amount of innovation going on in property. So there's something called prop tech, which you may have heard of. It's getting a lot of investment these days. We're doing an event on prop tech on May 26th of so next month. And as I said, in the interval, the board and leadership of NYPAY talked about it. We're trying to get something up for just a pure networking event. So just keep your eyes open. We don't have a date for that yet, but the plan is to have something sometime in between the 20th next week and the 26th, the next evening event, that would be an opportunity to network with some of the people who are involved in NYPAY. With that, I would just like to, again, in advance, thank the participants for joining. Thanks, Patty, for the idea and for driving this forward. And with that, I'd like to pass it over to Patty Hewitt.
Great. Thanks so much, David. It is so exciting to be here tonight with you. Thank you all so much for joining, whatever time zone you may be in. It's really a pleasure to be with you today. I'm Patty Hewitt, also known as Paymentgal. That's a moniker I've used on Twitter. It's my Twitter handle. I've used it for many, many years and incorporated it into my business and now into Paymentgal conversations. And I hope this is the first of many such conversations. But I first have to shout out to NYPAY. Let me just say that NYPAY has been a tremendous partner on this event. David, the board, the back office team have just been stellar, working with me to help develop this, to launch the webcast, to allow us to use their platform. They've just been fantastic partners. So I really echo what David has to say. Please connect with NYPAY. They're all about connections and conversation. This is very much in their wheelhouse. So please make sure you connect with them. I'd also like to thank, again, our panelists for agreeing to represent their segments of the market. So before I introduce them, I just want to give you a little background as to how we got here. So I'm an analyst and observer of the market. I've spent my entire professional career in payments, and it's been a fantastic ride, and I'm looking forward to more years to come. But one of the constructs of the market that has puzzled me for a very long time has been interchange. And recently I posted an article on LinkedIn simply called Disrupting Interchange. And in that article, I just asked some questions around why is fintech disrupting so much of our market, but yet interchange as a business model has really stayed very static. You know, I think about where interchange came from. You know, how did we first develop interchange? Well, it was developed by financial institutions for financial institutions because those are the major participants in the market, and the networks in those days were cooperatives. And so they created this really magical system that we use to grow our business. And I would like to be an apologist for just a moment for interchange and say it is a business construct that really worked. It worked to get our business off the ground and to create the market that we enjoy today. It also is a methodology by which we can quantify the transfer of value between disconnected parties, our open loop network concept. Brilliant. It worked extremely well. And that's why we are where we are today. However, I also argue that interchange is no longer beneficial to our market. And in fact, some of the difficulty that I had in just allowing panelists on and getting panelists to discuss interchange openly tells me that this market is constrained. And if interchange is one of our main economic engines in payments, it's what we've used, one of the things that we've used, mechanisms used to create ubiquity. Think about how important ubiquity has been to our market and how difficult that has been, for example, for mobile wallets to achieve, right? There is value in interchange, and there's value in our ability to quantify the transfer of value between disconnected parties. That has tremendous value. But what I would argue is that though we're still operating from back in the day, you know, I'd like to see interchange pulled forward. And I really don't want to have the government or judges tell us how we should manage interchange. I'd encourage and challenge our industry. Let's go back to our roots. I think our industry can figure out what the solutions are for interchange and create an interchange system that is once again beneficial to our market and to a broader range of participants in our market. Why can't interchange be more dynamic? Why can't interchange flow both ways? Why are we not asking these questions about interchange? And that's really where this conversation comes from, is that viewpoint. So I've designed this as a series of discussions. So I'd like you to imagine yourself, you're now in Payments University Business School. We're in one of those big auditoriums. The panelists are up front. They're having their discussion, and we are observing this because what we're going to be doing today is a root cause analysis. We're going to be talking about the problem of interchange. And that is a root cause analysis. So we're going to be doing that with our panelists, who I'll introduce in just a minute, and that construct. Next week, once this week we've done our root cause analysis, we kind of figured out what our problem is. Next week, we're going to talk about, well, is there a solution? What is the solution? Does it need a solution? You know, I'm sure there's people of the opinion that it doesn't need a solution, and that's perfectly fine. You know, this is a safe place for us to speak. As David mentioned, There is no press allowed to this event, and if there are any press, we welcome you as individuals, but not as journalists, and this is an entirely off-the-record conversation. Our panelists, who I will introduce, are here as private individuals discussing their experience and their opinions in the market and nothing more. This is a place for us as an industry. And I'm very heartened by the number of people that have signed up for this, with these series of webinars, and hopefully will participate. I hope that you send in questions and comments as this discussion goes along. So the way this is going to work is that each of the participants are going to state what their view of Interchange. And I very specifically designed this to have panelists that would represent our four-sided market, our open loop network model. So we have individuals that are going to speak from the financial institution perspective. They're going to speak from the merchant acquiring perspective. Unfortunately, I was unable to secure a participant from the network perspective. David and I will try to fill in a little bit there and try to play devil's advocate, but some of you may have opinions or want to pose questions relative to that. That's fine. You're welcome to do that. I think next week we may be able to have someone that can participate with us on the solution side of it. So once they've presented their opinions, they're going to debate and discuss those amongst themselves. And I invite you to participate through posting questions and comments, and we will interject those as they see fit. So that's the process. Welcome to Naked Interchange, redressing the problem of value transfer. So our panelists are as follows. First, I'd like to introduce Dean Sheaffer. Dean is an expert on merchant services from the retail perspective. He spent decades at a large retailer, managing their payments business and thinking about payments products and merchant side of our business every single day. So he'll be speaking from that perspective. Next, we have Bob Steen. Bob has spent his entire banking career advocating and growing the community bank market. He's an expert in Durban speak on the exempt side of our market, our all-important small financial institutions and community-based financial institutions. So welcome, Bob. And last but not least, Jon Prendergast. Jon is an expert in large financial institutions. His career has been very focused within large financial institutions and the large financial institution issuing side of the market, and he's going to be talking about his perspective from that viewpoint. And those are our panelists. So thank you once again for participating today. I look forward to a robust and constructive discussion. So in order to remain neutral, we've agreed to start off in alphabetical order. And so I'm happy to say that Jon comes up first. So Jon, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thanks a lot, Patty, and thank you for having me. I think it's a great forum, and the ability to have an open and clear discussion on this topic is a great opportunity. I will say it's the first time that I've ever gone alphabetically in anything in my life, being a P, and we had a little joke about that beforehand. So it's something new for me. I guess if I wanted to talk about what I thought about Interchange, I guess the first thing I would do is go back and look at kind of what are the facts in the marketplace. And the facts of the marketplace to begin with are what you said in the beginning. You said being an apologist, and I wouldn't be an apologist. I'd just say it's been a model that has been amazingly durable and amazingly productive. It's increased the rate of purchase. It's helped merchants come up the curve on things. Even things such as Square, which basically take Interchange and allow that to be put down to very small businesses with little friction. They still use the Interchange model to a certain degree, and it's been something that has been integral to increasing the economy, increasing the payment fluidity within our industry or with our society, and it's been to a great degree beneficial to all parties. Now, are there absolutely debates about, who gets the most benefit and what's fair and all of those things? You can't deny that there are debates on those, but overall, it's a model that was developed so that banks could serve. And you're right, it was developed by the associations, and I'm old enough to remember the associations in this business. It was a model built by the associations to serve multiple clients, multiple customers, to serve their consumer customers, to serve their corporate and business customers, and as a way to bring them together and to give value, which is that connectedness, that payment, and take some value as a fee for making that connection. And like most things, in any innovation, if it works, then it lasts. And if there's still value for people, then it continues to last. And that's what I've seen, for 20 some years, is that no one's fully happy with it, believe it or not. And I know that people would say, well, obviously the banks are happy, or this side's happy, or that side's happy. Nobody's fully happy. I mean, you can make the case that consumers, especially in credit, are probably the happiest. For customers going to Rome on frequent flyer, points, Interchange is what supports that. And so anybody on this call, if you've ever used frequent flyer miles or redeemed cash back, then you've been the beneficiary of Interchange, and not just the banks. So the models have grown up in a way to distribute value, to incent customers to use cards, to use the payment rails, which means to spend money at merchants. And I think that there's pretty good evidence out there that this model facilitates increased payment, increased economic benefit, increased purchases, at merchants that wouldn't be there without things like rewards, and without the lack of a drag and lack of friction for that cards give you. So when I think of Interchange, I think of something that's been very successful, that, like anything else in life, isn't perfect, but that has withstood the test of time, and that to me is probably the greatest touchstone of success.
Okay, Jon, thank you so much. Really appreciate your thoughts about that. I think next up is Steen. Steen, take it away.
Thanks so much. I appreciate you having me here. David, thank you very much for creating the platform for us. I think actually both Patty, you and David, and my fellow panelists, I would characterize you as courageous. There are a lot of people that don't want to talk about Interchange in an open forum, and I think this is certainly the first time I've seen this happen, and I'm appreciative of it. As you might imagine, from the merchant perspective, I have a little bit of a different point of view than Jon does. And
really?
Who would have thought, right? Who would have thought? What I'd like to do, though, is I'd like to start off with agreeing with Jon, which is Interchange is intended to reflect the transfer of value. And it's the transfer of value amongst the consumer, the merchant, the issuing bank, the network, all of those parties that Patty tried to pull together for us here, with the notable exception of the consumer. Where I find the first strand of the problem is that Interchange is not negotiable. And what I mean by that is Interchange fees and assessments. So yes, I absolutely get that if you're a small merchant, you are negotiating with ISO or somebody else for a merchant discount rate. And I also get that if you are one of the largest merchants in the world, you may be able to negotiate a special deal for yourself. But for larger merchants of scale, the card associations set an interchange rate based on the type of transaction, the card type, and your MCC, and a bunch of other factors. And that rate is non-negotiable. It is set by the Visa and MasterCard predominantly. And when you look at interchange in the United States, it is substantially higher than in the vast majority of the rest of the world. And one has to ask why in an industry that has had significant technology advancements, and many other factors that should be driving down the overall cost of that value exchange, why interchange increases on a fairly regular basis. I think the second strand is that interchange is complex and non-transparent. So if you take a look at all of the interchange rates for all of the different card brands and all of the different MCCs and all of the different sales channels, there are some 400 plus different interchange rates. And by the way, when a consumer presents their payment card at a merchant, the merchant has no way of knowing what that transaction will cost them. They have no idea what interchange rate will actually be applied to that transaction. I know of no other industry in which that is the case. And I would also argue that interchange as it relates to Visa, MasterCard, Discover, American Express is almost exclusively unidirectional, meaning that the interchange, that value is the cost of the transfer of value is ultimately paid by the consumer through the merchant, through the card networks to the issuer. It's always been strange to me. So I started off my career as a 20-something-year-old guy helping a large department store build its private label credit card portfolio. At one point in my career, we sold that credit card portfolio to one of the biggest banks, and we earned royalties. Think of it as reverse interchange for each and every one of those transactions. So for every transaction we moved from a credit transaction to a credit, meaning Visa, MasterCard credit transaction, to a private label credit card transaction, the difference between the interchange we would have paid and the royalty we did earn for that transaction was more than the bottom line profitability percentage for the company. Think about that for a minute. So it begs the question is, if there is value transfer, why is it unidirectional? How is it measured? And who and how is the value determined? I think there's also one of the things that has bothered me most in my career is that there is also unintended value transfer. What I mean by that is that as a merchant, unless you have just a couple of SKUs, like a gas station that can set different prices for cash and credit, it is impractical, if not impossible, for a large merchant to set different prices for cash and credit on potentially hundreds of thousands of different SKUs. So effectively what happens is interchange, one of the biggest line items in merchants' P&L, it gets effectively baked into the cost of goods and services. So the people that benefit and are able to fly to Puerto Rico or fly to Europe using their points, those points are paid for in large part by the cost of goods and services for those that are unbanked and underbanked and least able to afford it. So from the merchant perspective, I think that there are some fundamental components of interchange that need to be fixed, need to be addressed to create a balanced and equitable system for all four parties. And again, Patty, David, thanks for having me.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Dean. Thanks a lot for teeing up that viewpoint of the market and for being here with us today. Well, last but definitely not least, Bob, we're going to turn it over to you to talk about interchange from the small financial institution perspective.
Well, thank you, Patty. I'm clearly the guy with a balanced view. I hope. I certainly respect and understand everything that both Jon and Dean said, and I see those perspectives in different ways in my small bank. The small merchants really struggle with an affordable and practical way to accept cards. And we frankly do not have a good option for them. So a lot of our, because of the way the volume works, a lot of our customers unfortunately have gone to the third parties and the non-bank solutions. And of course the interchange is higher to make that work. My view of this is where the friction is largely in the routing choice. I just don't think the choice is there. And Reg II requires two brands on the card, but it means almost nothing. And we've experimented with some closed loop products where because of the closed loop nature, we only put one brand on the card. It was exempt from Reg II, and the acceptance level proved to me, the lack of acceptance proved to me that two brands on the card just didn't really mean very much. And I agree in part with Dean on the matrix of interchange rates. It's dizzying, and for a merchant to not know, I agree with this, not know that may be an international card. It may have all these other types of incentives baked in, and the cost of accepting that card is significantly more than accepting a PIN-based card with a debit network, for example. So I just think at the lack of a better term, I just think the lack of standards in the industry, the kind of standards we have, even in a paper check industry, or certainly the ACH industry, the requirement that every bank, every financial institution in the United States since the early 70s have had to be able to accept an ACH credit. And over time, we know what the rules are. It's not perfect. Disputes are messy. Exceptions are messy, but fraud is certainly a big part of this conversation, and it's exhausting for us as a small bank to deal with the fraud. And a good part of it is just bad choices by our own cardholders and customers, and so there's no easy fix to that. But I come down on the side that if we should have merchants should have routing choice. And I just think that that's really gets in the way. Thank you.
Very good. Okay. Well, now's the time for you to discuss what everyone just had to say. We'll let the panelists have an opportunity to discuss amongst themselves what they just heard, and then we'll be interjecting with some questions as well. We're already getting some questions and comments coming in, so we'll interject those. But let's get started with the conversation here. Bob, Dean, or Jon, anyone want to kick it off?
And thanks, Dean and Bob, for those points of view, because again, going back to the point of having an open discussion and debate, I think it's the healthiest thing we can do, because everything needs to evolve. right? Nothing lasts forever. And I think that, you know, this model has been evolving, will evolve, and it'll probably come under pressure from evolution in payments in general as new systems and others come on. We're seeing some of that in the industry now. But one thing which I think, in looking at these new systems coming on, as I've talked to some of the folks building them and bringing them in, one thing which I keep impressing them is that they need to account for the certainty that the card system allows for merchants and consumers. Consumers know that if they are, if for some reason whatever they're purchasing is not, right, if the services that they're getting are not sufficient or substandard, or they feel that they were, I don't say ripped off, but not, it wasn't a good deal for them, and they didn't get what they thought they were getting. When you use a card, you know that you are able to go back and put in a dispute. And that feeling, I started my career as a customer service rep, right on the phones, talking to 200 customers a day. It was one of the most informative and frankly, maddening at times experiences I've ever had. But listen, you're never going to get better research than that. And one of the things I knew was that customers felt good using a card because they felt they could go if something happened, the merchandise was defective or the service was faulty, they could come back and dispute it. And so there was a good feeling for consumers of the certainty of the system, that the system worked for them. And from the other hand, my feeling always was that, merchants felt like they knew that check wasn't going to bounce, right? There was a certainty of payment. Now, I mean, Dean, your point about the variation, is absolutely true. I mean, I think I don't know what the variation is. Is it 50 bips? Is it between the different types of cards or whatever? I'm certainly not an expert in that, but it's within what I would say is a latitude that most merchants will say, okay, I'm willing to take the certainty of this rather than letting checks bounce or have breakage in my cash handling. That's probably going to cost me even more than that. And so I do go back to the idea that in general, this system has been successful and persistent because of the value. Can you pick this apart? Yes, but I would say that in a system like ours, an economic system, which is basically capitalistic, although it's not purely capitalistic, it's managed, God bless, I'm very happy about that it's not just dog eat dog, but it allows, for evolution, that we should really look to that as a way to supplant this system, not change the system radically or court legislative change to it, but really build a better mousetrap. If there is a better model for this that can be built in the financial services industry, then we should be the ones to build it. And we should build it with the knowledge and the subject matter expertise and the passion that built this system 60 years ago.
Well, Bob, I would agree that the dispute process is important. I personally experienced it myself, where something wasn't what it was supposed to be. We try not to we try not to argue it out that way, but sometimes that's your last resort, and it's an effective resolution one way or the other. And so I think all the parties agree. I do think on the routing issue, I think it comes down to just dominance in the marketplace, and I think will if we don't figure out a better way to do this, I think that will catch up with the process, because I think that, you know, the dominance keeps showing up, and it's getting to the point that I think, again, that we will see regulatory or legislative changes that never come out the best way, in my view. You know, when Durbin was being considered, you know, I'm the smallest bank on the planet, and I joined up with a friend of mine with the Navy Federal Credit Union, and we went to our two senators from Iowa and trying to make the case that if the smallest bank and the largest credit union could agree on anything, it was the price fixing was just not a good idea. It just was not. And it's proved not to be, in my view. It gave a small bank a little slack on the interchange piece of it, but again, it's going to catch up with us. And people are gaming that now. Organizations are gaming that, and it's the outcome of that is all but certain. And so I'm just suggesting that we don't want the legislative solution if we can possibly avoid it.
I agree.
Yeah, I would agree with that too. One of the things, though, that I would argue is that we have had to pursue both legislative fixes and fixes through litigation because the playing field today is uneven. Again, the prices for debit and credit are set by the networks, and then for regulated entities, clearly debit is set by regulation. For unregulated entities, not so much. However, as Bob, you know, even with Reg II, there are impediments to routing where merchants could obtain fairer prices through the regional debit networks rather than routing over the Visa and MasterCard rails. In some cases, those impediments appear to be intentional, because in cases where the impediment is presumed to exist, it's overcome in a nearly identical situation. And I'm reading through just some of the questions. So one of the questions is, we're mixing up debit and credit, totally different economics. Yes, you're absolutely right. There are totally different economics for debit and credit, but consider the merchant perspective, which is, if I'm selling, you know, a pair of socks and a pair of shoes and a shirt and a tie, it doesn't really matter to me whether the consumer is presenting a regulated debit card that's going to cost me 25 cents or a World MasterCard that's going to cost me $3, right? I mean, there is a multiple difference. You know, it's not just 50 basis points. The difference between a regulated credit card and a regulated debit card and a high-end credit card can be very, very substantial. And there is no incremental value to the merchant for accepting that debit card as opposed to a credit card. And it is particularly difficult for merchants to steer customers between the use of a debit card or a credit card, particularly when consumers, especially affluent consumers, will earn significant rewards by using their high interchange credit cards. You know, we see it happen all the time. So again, is there value for the consumer? Is there value for the merchant? You bet. Is the pricing of interchange such that that exchange of value is fairly priced for each of the parties? I would argue strongly that it's not.
I would just say in response to that, Dean, that merchants have the option to not take cards, and if the value of the card acceptance is significant, then they're making that choice. I mean, this is it is in the end, again, a society which allows merchants, especially merchants being very often entrepreneurs, to manage their own businesses and make their own decisions as to what their costs should be and the value of those dollars spent to their businesses. And so, I'd say most people on this call probably have had some value-added card that brings either rewards or cash back. And so to decry it, I'm not going to say it's hypocritical. I'm just saying we're all part of it to a great degree. And so if we wanted to take that out of the equation and say that we shouldn't have any rewards, okay, that's fine. That changes the economics. I just don't. It's a way that people that drives business, that drives more purchasing because people want to do it. And the other thing I'd say is, merchants. There have been many studies that have proven that none of the money that was saved by Durbin on debit actually went to decreasing prices in stores. And you could make the argument that long term it was a bottom line effect and all these things. But the discussion as we were going through Durbin was that we want to lower prices for consumers. And there was absolutely no evidence that post Durbin those prices came down. So if we're going to argue that this is about giving consumers a break, then we should at least recognize that data historically does not hold up the fact that happened.
Yeah, I'm not sure that I agree with that, but I have read those studies and understand the data in that perspective. I would argue that it is impractical for any significant merchant not to take Visa and MasterCard. And once again, I agree that there is an exchange of value, and I agree that there is value to merchants for accepting cards. What I don't agree with is that a duopoly can set the price for a service in an anti-competitive way that forces merchants to accept whatever price they set. So either they choose not to accept cards and become entirely uncompetitive with their peers and go out of business, or they accept the prices set by the duopoly for that value, whether they get that amount of value or some other value. And again, I would encourage folks to take a look at interchange rates throughout the world and ask yourself why they are in the United States what they are as compared to other developed countries.
Quite a few people have posted notes and comments really from the consumer perspective. I think, Dean, you pointed out in your opening comments that we don't have the consumer represented here explicitly. We are all consumers. But I think that we can also agree that, at least I am seeing, I'll agree with myself as that I'm seeing a lot more surcharging happening slowly. It's kind of quiet. A lot of it tends to be on, larger purchases or B2B purchases. I know as a small business, I'll see that tacked on, that's an extra couple of percentages. So is it unfair to say that if we have a cost of card acceptance that consumers should pay a fair share of that? Is that one of the problems with interchange? Is that, at least in the United States, we've always taken the tack that consumers, we should shield consumers. We're a competitive environment. I'm gonna shut off my video because my internet's starting to get unstable. That we shield consumers, we shield them from fraud, we shield them from paying fees for things. But is that really one of the problems with interchange? Is that we have created an expectation that consumers receive things for free, even though I understand that from a credit card perspective, they'll pay sometimes very large annual fees for those high reward cards. I recognize that. So Can we talk about that a little bit? The consumers, let's dive into that a little bit more. If consumers are part of the problem.
Patty, I would say it's more than free, right? So I use my Platinum American Express, and not only do I pay the same price as the unbanked or underbanked person is paying for that same pair of shoes, the same shirt, the same tie, I, as the Platinum cardholder, also now get rewards points that I use to fly to Europe or do whatever I do. That, again, my argument is not that, you said it best, which is, how should each party to the system pay their fair share or earn their fair share? And that's what I think is fundamentally broken, because the system is designed today such that one party in the four-party system sets the value proposition for all four parties, and that's simply broken.
Anyone else want to talk about that? The idea of consumers paying their fair share. The question's been posed, should we be using Interchange to fund rewards programs? Should that be the case? Is that the right mechanism? Is Interchange the right mechanism for that? Or does that create an imbalance?
Well, I'll pitch in here on that. I think if we're making an argument that Interchange, the model of Interchange, has worked forever, since the beginning, and it drives consumer purchases. I struggle with that, and I keep coming back to the routing. The routing is decided largely by the processor, unless you're a large merchant that can negotiate your own deal. And the processors, I would suggest, are incentivized to route their transactions in certain ways that many times cost even the card issuer more in terms of the transaction fee, particularly on the debit side, on the pinless debit, for example, or pin-based debit. So fundamentally, I think one could argue, or at least challenge the concept that Interchange is the model that we have evolved, that has evolved to that it's based largely on incentives, even to the consumer, to the cardholder, to the processor that decides routing, because a small merchant has no idea how the transactions are being routed, if that's favorable to them or unfavorable to them. And I think fundamentally, if Interchange is a solid model that we think it should be, I'm not sure why we need incentives coming from all different directions. Unfortunately, we've trained our consumers that they should make money on a purchase, and in my world, our banking industry has trained our customers that they shouldn't pay for banking services. And so we've done this to ourselves. And I'm just concerned that, Interchange is a source of income for our bank. It's not a big source. It's not a game changer, but it is at least revenue. But somebody else has decided how much I get and what the pricing structure is. And it's not us. We just take what we get for issuing a card. And I think there's something fundamentally wrong about that. And but it's interesting, the fees that I set, people don't want to pay. The revenue I make on cards, again, somebody else decides the formula for that.
Jon, do you want to talk about this piece?
Well, I do think and I'm not representing the networks by any means, and I'm on record as saying that, I think we need to develop new systems to supplant Interchange if it's not the right one. So I'm not defending Interchange per se. I will defend the fact that Visa and MasterCard built these systems and develop these systems to the great benefit of the economy overall. And that in our political and economic system, generally, there's always exceptions, and there are limits, but generally, when an entity, corporate or personal, develops something and has that property, intellectual property, or or system platform, they generally can get to benefit from it. The question that I think we're asking, I'm hearing from Dean, a little bit from Bob, is at what point do we make the decision that it is so important and so pervasive that we need to figure out a way to make sure that it is equitable. I think Durbin did that very well, very effectively, I should say, for debit, and effectively cut it down. Credit, there's a lot more complexity in credit than there is in debit. The fraud's much higher. The credit risk that banks take is significant on this. Bob, you probably know that. So if there is not a system that incents banks to lend via these systems, there's going to be a significant decrease in the ability of people to have the liquidity that they need. And again, you can look at the credit card and say, people need to be careful. I agree with that. Believe me. As I said, I was a customer service rep and I dealt with a lot of people in a lot of trouble at times. So I have absolute empathy there. But I also dealt with a lot of people who needed that credit card at times to get them through a month or two when they didn't have the money, and it was a godsend to them. And so I think there is value in this system, specifically in the interchange system related to credit, in that it underpins the liquidity of credit and the ability for people to pay for things that they might not be able to get and that they need. Sometimes they don't need, and that's a whole different issue, but that they need to get them through this, through times. So I think it is really important. As far as advanced, in societies or whatever, developed societies, we tend to use credit a lot more than most. At least from my knowledge, and I'm certainly not an expert on international banking, but it seems that is something that is a great benefit to a lot of our customers, or a lot of our consumers. Sorry, somebody's saying something there.
Did somebody want to say something there? No? You all are going on mute. One of the things that I think about as I'm listening to this is really kind of two things that I think about, and I think some folks in the chat are posting about this as well. And is the problem with interchange the fact that, as Dean mentioned early on, everything flows one way. It's a one-way system. I'm familiar with some merchants that have extremely effective fraud detection programs and have invested many millions of dollars into fraud detection and do an excellent job with that, regardless of the payment type that they might be presented to. So there's that aspect of it. Should they be rewarded for that? And further, that on the issuing side, when we're talking about credit cards, there are other important revenue streams that are available for credit cards. They're certainly not reliant on interchange. Interchange really is used in a lot of credit card programs, as we know, for benefits that flow to the consumers. But to some of the panelists' point, it is an inequitable system from a consumer perspective. So, if we can kind of talk about that, once again, I'm trying to get to what's the root cause here. Is the root cause the fact that it is just not a dynamic system? It is a static system, and it should be more dynamic, more bilateral in the way that it's able to operate. And again, we're not here to talk about solutions. I'm trying to understand the problem. So if anyone wants to comment on some of that, and we've had a few comments in the chat about that as well, could you all talk about that piece of it? Dean, could I ask you to kind of kick us off and talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, sure. So I think that you are exactly right. So there are many, many points at which value can be added to the overall system. Fraud detection is one of them. Chargeback management is another of them. The fact of the matter is that the networks still rely on archaic bifurcation, meaning there are card present transactions and card not present transactions. That is an anachronism when you think about buy online, pickup in store, curbside pickup, all of those other mixed channels, the omni-channel experiences that consumers go through today. And there are lots and lots and lots of opportunities to help protect the system, whether it's through a robust PCI program, whether it's through a robust data security program, whether it's through ensuring that personally identifiable information and the cardholder data environment is properly protected. There are lots of different players and different ways to protect the system. The banks, the issuers pay for some, the networks pay for some, the merchants pay for some. But I would argue, exactly to your point, Patty, is that there is no mechanism in the system today other than reducing things like chargebacks, fraud, reducing interchange costs through non-optimized processes like manual entry and delayed settlement, and all of those other things that can further drive up interchange. There is no incentive built into the system that says, hey, if I do a really good job of protecting the system from fraud or chargebacks, I'm rewarded for that. It just doesn't happen. There's only the stick, which is, if I do a poor job of it, all of a sudden I'm on a fraud monitoring program, or I am forced to accept every chargeback that is posted against me, regardless of whether it's legitimate or not. So yeah, Patty, I completely agree with you. Another piece of this mechanism where fairness can be derived is through valuing what the parties provide to the system, and whether that's the building volume that builds balances on credit card accounts, or again, protecting the system. All of those things should be considered in determining what each individual party pays or earns based on their participation in the exchange of value.
Okay. Other comments from any of the other participants about that? Anyone else want to comment on that? No, I'm going to take that as oh, go ahead.
I was just going to offer that, it's messy, because just, for example, the pay at the pump, EMV, all that stuff, how hard that's been to standardize that or to put that in place. And so, I doubt if you could count the different sets of guidelines in each individual merchant card acceptance apparatus. It's just the lack of that standard is just painful to the industry. And I understand there's a cost involved. It costs a lot of money to put EMV in a pump, but I'm not a believer that EMV solves all of our fraud problems at all. I'm not suggesting that, but the point is, it has made some difference, and certainly just the processors, all their different routing combinations is just a hopeless maze of uncertainty for if you're trying to figure out what it's going to cost you to conduct a transaction.
So is the problem that, and again, I'm going to come back to this, what is the problem? Is the problem that we as an industry are unable to articulate to the merchant when they accept that card what it is that they're paying for or how much they are paying? one of the things that I think about is, and John, I'd like to kind of put you on the spot and ask you to give me your sense of this after I state it, give you what you think about this. And that is that, does the model of interchange actually constrain financial institutions in such a way that it forces them to continue to operate in specific silos, where because their P&Ls are product oriented and they're having to consider products at a vertical level, that it locks them into thinking of their consumers, their customers in this kind of categorized, classified way, instead of thinking about their customers as at the relationship level. You know, interestingly, recently there was a fintech launched a product where they're offering pretty robust rewards, and we can't quite figure out how they're doing that. And I'm wondering if how they're doing it is they're doing it on the debit side of the house, and how they're doing it is by really looking at the total relationship value, and that so they're elevating their customer relationship. Does that does that ring in any way for true or untrue to you? Maybe you could talk about that a little bit. If it actually ends up constraining financial institutions, their reliance on interchange in certain categories.
Yeah, well, I mean, I'll comment, won't address the fintech one, which is, you know, they're probably using seed money to fund it to get accounts. Honestly,
Yeah.
that's what we've seen. So that's what we see. So,
yeah.
so
I'll give you that point for sure.
Yeah, it's an untenable business model. But to your, and I'm not saying that's what's happening in that case, because I don't know who you're talking about, but we have seen that in the market. That you're basically buying accounts. But your core question about, does interchange constrain us so that we're not taking a holistic view? I think it's probably been that way in the past a lot more, in that different revenue to define different verticals within organizations and financial services, you know, and so you did tend at times to get disjointed views of the customer instead of holistic views of the customer. I think that is starting to go away, and it has been going away. I know one bank, one very large bank, who has basically, you know, in the last 10, 12 years, has basically started only to market to their own customers. So they, you know, they used to do a lot of credit card marketing outside their base for prospects. And then they made a very big decision to say, nope, we're only going to market to our customers. And they only market to their customers because they know the value of those customers. They know who those customers are, and they're big enough that they can really still grow their portfolio significantly. And they've really pushed to look at customers holistically and the overall value. I do think that, you know, that's something that financial services industry needs to do more and more and more. And we are doing more. We're getting better at it. I mean, Bob, your point earlier about, you know, basically giving our services away to customers so that, you know, and finding the revenue in other places, that is certainly that something came on in the 80s and 90s as fees went away from cards, fees went away from checking. And we kind of peanut buttered the cost across everybody. So it's, you know, we're getting back to a holistic view. Is there the ability that potentially that someday a subscription model might find its way back into financial services, into banking? You know, a la Prime or something else? Very well, maybe. But one thing we need to do as financial institutions is figure out
I think we got a Zoom moment here.
I think we have a Zoom moment. Bob, did you want to say something while we're waiting for John to come back?
I was listening to Jon, trying to understand where he was going, and I think he made a really key point that we've misallocated the cost in the wrong places, because it's not free what we do. We're providing online banking, we're providing mobile banking, we're providing instant access to accounts. Our small bank just went live last week with the clearinghouse real-time payment of receive only. And what we're seeing is what it looks like we've done is we spent a lot of money to make it easy for my customers to receive payments through Square and Venmo and PayPal. And I'm not sure exactly where the logic of that is, but that's what we do. We find ways to pay for things that we do not get a return, and I'm concerned that the incentive model that drives cards is exactly the wrong thing.
And by incentive model, Bob, you mean Interchange as an incentive model?
Well, I think that where processors are incentivized to route transactions a certain way, consumers are incentivized to first get a card and get $100 if you buy an Amazon card or accept an Amazon card. And I'm not picking on Amazon; it's too many to count. And there's no cost. Not only is there no cost to them for having that cash in their wallet, they get paid for using it, and I just believe, and I'm not going to change that. It's bigger than our small bank, but it's a fundamentally flawed system in my view. But it's probably an academic point and not worth spending a lot of time discussing.
No, I would disagree with that. Of course, it's definitely well worth discussing. You know, we're trying to get to the root cause of the problems that we have with Interchange, and that is definitely one element of them. You know, let me switch gears here and talk about technology for a second. Dean, I wanted to ask you this question. You know, I've been in the market long enough to remember the switch from using floor limits and warning bulletins to fully electronic authorizations and point of sale terminals. And now we've just lived through the reterminalization of our market because of EMV. You know, these were all initiatives driven by the card networks, and they have been of great value from an efficiency perspective for our market. So I will state that. However, to your point, it is very blurry now, the lines between card present and card not present. And once again, we are reliant on an interchange system that is still using these kinds of definitions, although in a very awkward kind of way. However, is one of the problems with interchange the fact that in a market like the United States that is so large and complex, and where we're dealing with such big entities, you know, such large merchant entities, how realistic is it to think? I mean, I can remember how hard it was back in the day for merchants to just retool to have fully electronic authorizations. That was a huge project, a huge technical project back in the day. So do you think it would require that level of retooling? So if the problem is technology, is it possible for us to solve a problem like that, like technology?
So I think technology is one tool in the arsenal. I don't know that technology is the answer to creating fairness in the costs and benefits of an interchange system. What I will say is that my experience is, you know, re-platforming for EMV, even in the card present environment, was incredibly complex, incredibly expensive. I have several very good friends in the petroleum vertical, and making EMV work at automated fuel dispensers, fuel pumps, is even more complex for them and even more expensive. And there's even fewer certified technicians that are even allowed to integrate EMV readers into automated fuel dispensers. But I get that technologies like EMV are beneficial. What I don't get is why in the United States we would choose to go chip and signature and not chip and pin, right? So anybody ever validate a signature on any transaction? How many people just scribble some line or something when they quote unquote sign for their quote unquote credit transaction, right? So yeah, I think that technology is a tool in the toolbox, but I think that that technology needs to be developed under a governance structure that includes the four parties to the system, not developed by EMVCo or some other industry that not all parties have an equal voice in. So I think that is definitely a part of it, Patty.
So that's I think you bring up a really interesting point there, Dean. Thank you for opining that. And welcome back, John. Glad to have you back. Hi. I'm curious whether the panelists think that having a central arbitrator of interchange is part of the problem. That should we have a centralized arbitrator? Is that model still, it sounds like that model to me is part of the problem, that we don't need a centralized arbitrator of interchange. However, that presents the interesting question of what we do with our card products that are all branded. Co-branded products are a good example of that, all of which are rewards-based cards, all of those co-branded products between retailers and the network. So what do we do with that? Is having a central arbitrator the problem with interchange? Let's talk about that.
Where would that arbiter sit? I guess, I mean, we're getting to the point of making payments utilities, and if we do that, and the question is that what we want to do as a society? Because pretty soon, Bob, if they make the networks utilities, then all banks will be next. It's a very slippery slope, I think, at some point as to how much you dictate to a private company what they can and cannot do, rather than let market forces dictate that.
However, let me just push back on that gently and say that if we think about interchange in its original concept, which was a cooperative, I mean, that's what our business was back in the days. It was a cooperative. Banks were both issuers and acquirers, and they understood that balance. Is that a kind of construct you believe will no longer work in our society today, and we need something different?
So, I mean, my opinion, Patty, is that there is not fundamentally a problem with having a central arbiter of interchange. My issue is that today we effectively have that, except that the arbiter is Visa, MasterCard, who unilaterally set interchange rates to the benefit of the issuing banks predominantly, right? There is no opportunity, there is no evidence that interchange is set in such a way that it fairly rewards the parties to that transfer of value. And I don't know who that central arbiter would be in a system that is, evidence-based, on the value that a given party brings to the system. But if their were such a mechanism, automated or human, I think that would be, I think there's value to having the central arbiter that is disinterested and impartial.
So that's the defining point for you, an arbitrator that is disinterested and impartial.
That's right.
Okay. All right. Does anyone else have a comment about that?
Well, I'm trying to grasp the magnitude of that assignment. Just in our own small world, just dealing with the exceptions and disputes that we have, how that could possibly work at scale. I don't know. I will say that with regard to Dean's comment with regard to the brands driving interchange to the benefit of the issuing banks, I can tell you, Dean, and I could illustrate for you on our switch bill that when the brands drive the routing to their route, it costs us money versus a debit network choice that we would have. It costs us a lot. It's like 8 to 16 times more. And so I don't think, they make some money in this process. And I would say that they're, as much as they love us as banks, their primary motive is their own revenue stream.
Yeah, Bob, you're absolutely right. When I say banks, I'm thinking about the world's largest banks that control Visa and MasterCard. I'm not thinking about the independent community bankers that are the equivalent of the Main Street merchant that's the backbone of the country. So yeah, I completely get that you are much more aligned with the merchant perspective than the big bank perspective, and I feel your pain.
I think that there's an area though where we really begin to come together. And before we wrap up this session, and we're getting close to the end here, and I will take a few minutes to kind of synopsize what I've heard, at least right off the top, about what we think the problems are with interchange. There is common ground. I think one piece of common ground is the fact that I think at some level we can all agree that electronic payments are beneficial to participants. They are beneficial to merchants, and they are beneficial to issuers, and they are beneficial to consumers, and they're beneficial to the brands, to the networks as well. This is a beneficial market from that perspective. I think where I also hear some convergence is that there is also some agreement in the fact that there is imbalance in the market. So the question is, how problematic is that imbalance? How deep is that imbalance? As the conversation just between Dean and Bob pointed out, this is a complicated market that we operate in. It's very complex. We have a lot of participants. In the United States, we have huge millions of small merchants. We have very, very large merchants, and the same thing on the bank side, and they all have different kinds of drivers. So are we asking, is one of the problems with interchange is we're asking it to be all in a market that it can't be all in, that it's impossible for it to be all in unless it is much more dynamic. Someone want to comment on that? Are we asking interchange to do something it's not going to do? Are we chasing the wrong problem?
I guess I would say that if we're I don't know the answer to that, but what I would say is if we're asking interchange to do something that it can't do, then we need to find a different solution, and not try to to change the solution to fit that. As I said before, there are payment systems coming up, other things moving that are going to challenge the card payment networks in this system, and I think that is classic, capitalism and classic evolution. And instead of trying to make this into something it's not, maybe we should look to those systems as ways of value transfer that could be, more suitable to what we need.
Patty, I would say it's really a two-part question. And part one is, if there were a way to fairly represent the value transferred through a mechanism, call it interchange, call it whatever you want, that properly incentivizes, rewards each of the individual parties in that value transfer, that is foundational. And then the second question becomes, okay, is the cost of that value transfer, now that it's fair, does it make sense today? Are there more efficient mechanisms for value transfer? Are there other methods of payment that are more efficient and more effective? And I think that once you get to that answer, that then becomes your, North Star to where the U.S. payment system goes over the next couple of decades.
Okay. Bob, did you have any comments about that?
Well, yeah, I do. I think this is really an important discussion, and we're seeing, I think, three fairly distinct perspective, and I think that's a really healthy discussion. But I don't think it should get lost that, and I'll just use a personal example. I'm in Florida on vacation, and nothing I'd rather do than talk about payments. But
thank you very much, Bob.
But seriously, I'm on my way down here. I open an app that I can tell the system that I'm traveling to Florida. I get here, my debit card that I use almost exclusively works everywhere I've tried it. I ran into one small merchant the last trip down here that it did not work. It was a bizarre circumstance, but the point is, payments work, and we can argue about who's coming in first and who's not, but I don't think it should get lost that going to your point, Patty, to technology is pretty remarkable. And I would like to see it work better. I would like to see my ability to lower my cost of a transaction over the PIN network, over the debit network on a PIN-based transaction. I'd like to just be able to decide that. But in the meantime, it works. And I think going early on, John's early point, early into this conversation was the evolution of this. And I don't think we're done making it better. And merchants have a big voice, and they're entitled to that voice, and they're right in many respects that they're paying more for fraud than maybe they should be, particularly the merchants that pay attention to how to minimize that fraud. So I just don't think that should get lost in this.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate those comments. I'm going to take a few minutes. I'm going to start my video, and hopefully my internet connection will be favorable. I'd like to take a few minutes to kind of synopsize what we've heard, but let me thank the panelists very much for this open and honest discussion, and for all of the tremendous chat that's been in the chat room. We've had a lot of conversations going on, and I think that's exactly what we need to be doing as an industry. We said early on, do we as an industry want the government and judges to tell us how to do our business? My opinion is no, we don't. We should be driving our own car. So let's get in the driver's seat when it comes to this. And let me synopsize a few things I've heard just off the top of my head around what we think we as a group here we're thinking about might be problems with interchange. First of all, let me state something Jon said right up front, which I think he's absolutely right. It's very durable. It's a very durable model. It quantifies the transfer of value, and it's been a very durable model. And I think that's something to really think about. We shouldn't be throwing the baby out with the bathwater. However, some of the problems that we've noted is interchange is not negotiable for most of the market. I mean, we realize there are negotiations, of course, and the networks do allow that, but not for the vast market. It's very complex and it's not transparent. It truly is remarkable, as Dean said, that merchants continue to operate decades later in a system where they take a card and they don't know what it costs them to really make, they don't know the underlying cost around that. Bob said some of the problems with interchange have to do with routing and the fact that we have regulations in place, but that they're not, they are circumvented, and that we need to be able to have more surety around routing, both from an issuer and acquiring perspective. And that's part of the problem, is the routing piece. Another problem we identified is how do participants, should all participants pay their fair share, including consumers? You know, that's something that's verboten here in the United States, but should consumers pay their fair share? And I would argue that they are beginning to do that. As I said, we're seeing very quietly surcharges take place. We're also seeing the capability of merchants using payments orchestration types of technologies to begin to do a little bit of steering. So some of the problem is this creates this imbalance in the market. I think we can all agree that one of the problems with interchange is the imbalance and the fact that it is a tightly held construct that is not transparent. It's unilateral in the way that it is applied. And I think we would prefer seeing more of a bilateral arrangement. Interchange, however, one of the problems with interchange in the United States is it must be able to deal with scale. You know, we are a scale business here in the US. We can't get around that, and it has to deal with that. So these are just some of the items. There will be more, and we'll discuss that next week, but these are some of the items that I pulled out. And as I mentioned, we're going to follow up next week with a conversation about solutions and what do we think is the solution for some of these problems that we identified on today's call. So before I turn it over to David, I just want to thank the panelists once again for stepping up and representing your segment so well during this discussion. Thank you for all the participants, your great conversations and questions. And I apologize if we weren't able to get to all of your questions, but I encourage you to continue the discussions. And please message each other, message me. I've already had some invitations on LinkedIn, which is great. I want to continue these discussions, so thank you. And next week, I also please remind you, you must register on the NYPAY site to attend next week's event. It's going to be at the same time and in the same place, but you must register for it. So with that, David, I'm going to turn it over to you.
I'll be short and sweet. I just want to thank everybody as well. This has been a fantastic discussion. And I got to say, NYPAY's done 60, 65 events, and I've never seen such engagement on the part of the attendees. So I appreciate that. And next week, please join. Tell your friends. It's a good discussion and it's a way to talk about things that don't often get talked about. So please join us next week. Go to nypay.org and register. And thank you again to Patty, John, Bob, and Dean. So all the best, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye, everyone. Thanks again.
Bye, guys.